Good evening, everybody. We're glad to see you tonight. Thanks for being here as we join together for Bible study. We're wrapping up a study tonight that we've been engaged in for the last several weeks. The series of lessons entitled Major Tests of Our Faith, and our brother Bill Hall, many of us know and love Bill Hall, has really put together a number of valuable lessons for us to think about. The idea of it is things that really can knock you down spiritually, things that can really challenge you and unfortunately can cause some people to actually lose their faith. But major tests of our faith has been the theme, and I think we've talked about a number of really important subjects. Tonight's last lesson, if you're looking at your study guide, it's lesson 13. So he says, just briefly, introduction, one of Satan's most effective tools for destroying faith is to attack a person's convictions, which he has come to accept, but is poorly equipped to defend. And so I think that probably describes a lot of Christians. They believe something, they've committed to it, but they're not prepared to defend it. I give you maybe an example of that. So many of you, like me, you grew up in churches of Christ, and we just never had instrumental music. And so, I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's wrong to use instrumental music in worship. Well, then somebody gets a hold of me, and I haven't really studied that. I'm not really very well grounded. I can't defend that position. I've always been brought up to think that that's the way it should be, and so I've accepted that as being so, but I've never really prepared myself to be able to defend that position. And so somebody gets a hold of me and they just turn me inside out. They offer arguments that I'm not prepared to answer, and it just really, works me over spiritually. And I don't know if I have through the years known people in situations like that. And it could be any number of things. It could be evolution, or it could be, these days there are even members of the Lord's church who are questioning the necessity of baptism for remission of sins. Or maybe questioning maybe we've been wrong when we said that there are no miracles happening in the world today. And when people, if they pose those arguments and you're not prepared to answer, it can really shake you up. And so that's what this lesson's about. Josh?
Yeah, no, I just think it's interesting that 100 years ago or so, even people, different views of Baptists would be willing to debate their views, because they felt strongly about them. But we've gotten to this weird point to where now we're in society, it's like, well, it doesn't matter what you believe. And so it's I think we've kind of let our guard down some, because we really don't have to, or we feel like we don't really have to defend our position anymore. And so now we become weak in our positions, and we're not able to. So the Bible still says we've got to be able to defend our position. We're going to stand for the truth. But I think maybe some of this is just the culture we live in, because everybody says it doesn't matter anyway, and we've kind of got soft.
Years ago, members of the Church of Christ, people didn't want to engage us in discussion because they knew we knew our Bibles. Yeah. Members of the Lord's church used to be called walking Bibles. They know their Bibles. I'm afraid we don't deserve that reputation as much as we used to, because we are not as prepared to defend what we believe. And then, since we're not prepared to defend what we believe, then people can come along and really shake our faith.
Easy to fall over.
Yeah,
I can't stand on anything.
Yeah. All right, so our author asked us to begin with 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3. Verses 3 and 4. The question is, how are scoffers described in this text? So it says, knowing this verse, 2 Peter 3, verse 3, knowing this verse, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning. And then I want to add one more verse. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water, and the earth in the water, and so on it goes. So there's several phrases there that I think are really do define what scoffers do. Notice they walk after their own lust, verse 3. In other words, their ruling principle in life is, what do they like? What do they desire? What's pleasing to them? They walk after their own lust. And so these are not really spiritual people. These are people just trying to satisfy their own carnal desires. And they ridicule the beliefs of others. Notice they say, where's the promise of his coming? But the way that's written is they're making fun of or ridiculing people who believe that the Lord is coming back. Where's the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. So they walk after their own desires. They ridicule the beliefs of others. And then, verse 5 says, they're willingly ignorant of essential biblical truths. In other words, they choose to ignore, they willfully ignore biblical truths. Now, I think the thing that's always so impressive to us is that description is 2,000 years old, and it still fits lots of people today. So there are still scoffers. We're going to have to deal with scoffers who make fun of what we believe. We got to be prepared for that.
You know, in Ecclesiastes 1, Solomon made some observations. In verse 4, he says, one generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abides forever. The sun also ariseth, the sun goeth down, and hasten to its place where it rose. And he just talks about some observations about things just continue on as they always have. You know, and that's where he says there's nothing new under the sun in verse 9. So I think these scoffers have come along and they said, everything's just continuing like it always has. And so you come along with a different idea and say, well, it's not going to last forever. God said so. And a scoffer or a mocker is going to make fun of that. And they're following their own lust. I think one of the versions say following their own sinful desires. And so they're gonna make fun of that. Everything's continuing like it is, and you're telling me something's different that's going to happen. That's a bunch of nonsense, and that's what we got to deal with. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. So just the point of it is, the characteristic and practice of scoffers has been around for a long time. It's not going away. We're going to have to be prepared to deal with people who scoff at or ridicule the things that we believe and teach. That's just a reality, and we've got to accept that it's so. We can't be knocked off of our foundation just because someone belittles or make fun of what we believe. It's going to happen. It's always happened, right? And so just know to expect that.
All right. Question number 2 says, let's consider 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 16 to 18. So 2 Timothy chapter 2. Verses 16 to 18. All right, 2 Timothy 2:16 says, but shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase into more ungodliness. And their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who concerning the truth have erred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrow the faith of some. And so the question is, considering those verses, what was being taught in Paul's day that was overthrowing the faith of some? Well, it says there in verse 18 that there was this teaching that the resurrection is past already. And so it's interesting because verse 15 is a verse that we know really well. You know, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And then he immediately contrasts that in verse 16 with, but opposite of truth is this vain babblings. They don't make you more godly, they make it more ungodliness. And then there's this false teaching about this resurrection being past, and then the faith of some are being overthrown, and he even mentions 2 names there. So this teaching about the resurrection being past already evidently was shaking a bunch of people up. And these two folks, Hymenaeus and Philetus, it ate like a canker. I think some newer versions say cancer or gangrene. It's just spreading and overthrowing the faith. So an egregiously false doctrine, but because we're not standing on the truth, because we're listening to the vain babblings, people are giving over to that.
I think that's a really good point. This is just one example. I mean, we could apply it to lots of false doctrine, but the false doctrine of this text is the resurrection is past already. Well, that was provably false. Yeah. I mean, provably false. That had not happened, and yet these people were teaching it. They didn't care. They didn't care they wanted to teach what they were determined to teach, and they would not accept anything contrary to their position. And so this is sort of the characteristic of these people, is they're very strong in proclaiming what they believe in contradiction to the truth. They really will not be swayed by arguments based on truth, and unfortunately, it wreaks havoc on the faith of people. But remember, the lesson is the potential that our convictions are being attacked. This was happening here. These people's convictions were being attacked, and their faith was being overthrown by Hymenaeus and Hymenaeus and Philetus. And so, again, reality, it happens. Thoughts or comments here, anybody? Say again?
What time period is this? They're saying the resurrection's already happened?
Yeah, there were some people in the first century who were going around proclaiming that the resurrection had already happened, and if you missed it, you missed out. Paul wrote about that in.
Christ's resurrection.
Yes, they were talking about the final coming and resurrection. Yeah. They were talking about the resurrection, the end time resurrection. Wayne?
Yeah, the AD 70 doctrine that some of us even
Yeah.
today reaffirms that. They just redefine what the resurrection is.
Yeah. So this is not talking about the resurrection of Jesus. This is talking about our potential resurrection at the end of time. Jesus said, the hour, John 5, 28, 29, the hour is coming in which all that are in the grave shall come forth. They that have done good to the resurrection of life, they that have done evil to the resurrection of damnation. That hour is still, that has not happened yet. But back in the first century, and Paul wrote about this when he wrote to the brethren at Thessalonica, because that rumor was circulating there too. And it was, apparently it had lots of traction. People were believing it. And since some people were believing it, they were giving up on their faith. Well, we missed it. We missed the resurrection. What's the use? Why bother? And it was overthrowing the faith of some. It wasn't true. Again, provably not true, but the false teachers didn't care, and they continued their work. So if you were a Christian in the first century and you weren't prepared to know the truth about final judgment, the end time resurrection and final judgment, if you weren't prepared, these false teachers would come along like Hymenaeus and Philetus, and they could overthrow your faith. You've got to be grounded. Or they're going, and it doesn't have to be about that subject, obviously. It could be about any number of subjects. But there are people who will work you over if you are not well grounded in the truth you believe.
Yeah, to your point, I think in this case they were teaching, well, you missed it, so now you can't do anything about it, so don't do anything. In 2 Thessalonians 3, Paul wrote and was talking about, if you're not willing to work, neither should you eat. We got to be busy. This thing, we still got work to do. But yeah, there were some that were walking disorderly, and they were just saying, well, you missed the boat. Yeah. And so it's a shame, but yeah, evidently it had a pretty big, I don't know how widespread, but pretty widespread impact because Paul had to address it.
It's mentioned more than once. Yeah, exactly. Anybody else? All right, so go to 1 Peter 3, verse 15. This is a verse we cite a lot, and it really is an important one. 1 Peter 3:15. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. Give an answer there literally is make a defense. And so, can you do that? Do you feel comfortable doing that? Pick a Bible study. Baptism for the remission of sins. Lord's Supper every first day of the week. Instrumental music, evolution. You name the topic. Miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit. Can you make a defense of what you believe on those subjects? This is not saying it would be good. It would be advisable if you could give an answer or make a defense for what it's not a suggestion, it's a command. Be ready. And so as Christians, we've got to do that, and then that's going to help us. People are not going to be able to come along and shake our faith. if we studied well, for instance, on, pick one of those subjects, if we have studied well on baptism, there are plenty of people out there, religious people, who are going to try to deny what the Bible teaches about baptism. They're going to come up with a bunch of arguments. They always have. They could, if you're not well grounded on that subject, they could shake you up. Be well grounded. Be ready. Defend what you believe. Make a defense. The other part of that question is that instruction implies that we're going to have to be diligent students. We're going to have to apply ourselves and know. And so if at this juncture you don't feel that you'd be able to make a defense on basic Bible doctrines, could you make the case for no instrumental music? Could you make the case for Lord's Supper every first day? If you don't feel comfortable with that at this point, that's okay. But don't stay there. Don't be content to remain in that situation. Apply yourself and learn.
Yeah. I had two thoughts about this. So, in the context of these few verses, persecution's under consideration. In verse 13, it says, "Who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? If you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye." In verse 17, it says, "For it's better if the will of God be so that you suffer for well doing than for evil doing." So it's, there's gonna be kind of like our first question. There's gonna be points in time where the people of God are mocked for standing up for what they believe in, but God wants us to have courage to be able to defend our position. And then the second thing I thought about was, our goal when people mock me about whatever subject, and I try to defend that, my goal shouldn't be to win the argument or here I just got to be able to convert this person right off the bat. But my goal should be able to tell where I stand on the subject. And if the person wants to study with me, then hey, let's set up a time to study. But if they probably don't, they probably just want to attack me, then at least I've defended my position and I'm able to move on. God's pleased with that. If I'm able to make a defense for what I believe and give an answer. And I think that's the goal of people who are trying to mock us and persecute us, to be able to stand up for what we believe in.
And it's never wrong to say, I don't have an answer to that. So somebody poses a question to you that you haven't considered before. Let's take instrumental music. And so, we have studied before, but let's say you hadn't heard before this argument that the Greek word solo includes the accompaniment of instruments in worship. It wouldn't be wrong to say, I haven't really studied that very well, but I will, and I'll get back to you on that. If someone comes up with we should be very grounded on, no instrumental music in New Testament worship. But if someone presents a challenge or a question to you that you had not heard before, don't be afraid to say, I'm not really familiar with the argument you're making, but I'll study it and I'll get back to you on that. And there's plenty of helps available, and there's plenty of brethren who can help. So don't be afraid to say, let me get right back to you on that. And sometimes that's even good. It keeps the door open for more discussion.
Yeah. I do that pretty often because there's so many things people talk about that aren't biblical. Yeah. And they try to raise a religious argument. I have to say, I've never even heard of that before. Yeah. But I'll check it out and get back to you.
Yeah. Anybody, Karen?
In the last few months, I've heard some people use the term apologetics, and I actually have to look that up, and it has to do with defending the faith.
Yeah.
Is that a term that we use?
That's what this word is actually here in 1 Peter 3:100. It's apologia. Make a defense.
That's what I thought, because one person I heard mention that said, I find it so weary and so tiresome to go through apologetics. And I'm thinking, isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because the words change meaning. Yeah, when I say I'm going to make an apology, it's like, I'm sorry for what I believe. Please forgive me for what I believe. That's not apologia, or the study of apologetics is making a defense, giving an answer. Yeah. Anybody else? Wade?
Yeah, I think that's what's so important about these opportunities that is provided here. So we worship Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We have multiple meetings throughout the year. We have opportunities to be able to come together and study in classes, different subjects in classes, to be able to make a difference, to be able to understand. And so it's important for us, and there's got to be a lot of praise for the people that come to these. you know, because they're showing that they want to learn, they want to get better, they want to improve their faith, they want to gain more courage and more wisdom. I mean, so I think that's
I think you're right, and I appreciate this congregation because there's a desire for doctrinal teaching. A lot of places are a lot of churches of Christ are pretty much backing away from sound, strict doctrinal teaching, and it's showing. It's beginning to manifest in that people have their faith easily shaken because they haven't received that. We want our young people to be grounded in doctrinal truth, you know, because there are scoffers who will attack their faith. We have to be grounded. We have to ground our young people. We have to ground new converts. And I think that, as you suggest, Wade, there's an atmosphere here that nurtures that, and I think it's a good thing. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead.
All right. Number 4 says, let's consider Hebrews 5, verses 12 to the end of the chapter, verse 14, and then Hebrews 6 and verse 1. So I'll read Hebrews 5, beginning at verse 12, through chapter 6 and verse 1. Hebrews 5:12 says, "For when the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk, and not of strong meat. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on into perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God." So the question says, considering those verses, what problem existed among the Hebrew Christians according to these verses? These are really well-known verses that we know. We cite them pretty often. Verse 12 just says it so plainly. The time has come where you Hebrew Christians ought to be teachers, but you need to be taught again the very first principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not strong meat. They're still babies. They haven't grown at all. They should be at this point teaching, but instead they still need to be taught the very first things. And so it would be like, you know, for a dramatic kind of picture, it would be like me needing to go back to the baby class again and learning the very first principles because I haven't grown at all. And that shouldn't be the case at all. Chapter 6, verse 1 says, "Leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on to perfection." You know, you got to leave the first stuff behind eventually and move on to the things that are more complex, you know, the more difficult subjects.
There's milk and there's meat, and we should be able to grow to the point where we can digest the meat of the Scriptures. But there's clearly an expectation in verse 12 that we should reach the point of being able to teach others instead of having to be constantly brought back to first principles over and over and over again.
Yeah, everybody's going to be on a different levels at different times, but one thing's for sure, we should be growing, and they were not. And so I think, obviously rightfully so, they were scolded a little bit about that. You should have been growing, and you're not growing at all. You need to be taught again. And the Hebrew writer is sort of letting them have it, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah. John?
I think that's a really good example of the congregation just marking out. They're just going through the motion. There's no effort to really grow or to understand to gain knowledge, but to just go through the motion.
Yeah.
And Christ, God is very clear about what he feels about people who go through the motion.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. So but again, it's always impressive to me that the problems we face in the church today are not that different than the problems that existed in the first century. There was a problem of people who weren't growing and weren't grounded, didn't have good knowledge, needed to be still taught very first principle kind of things. They had not matured. They weren't able to digest the meat of the word. Times haven't changed that much. But clearly, that kind of a situation back then or now, not pleasing to the Lord.
Yeah, I think you did a lesson for us about tests, the tests that we'll face in life. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think you did a lesson not too long ago about tests we have to face. You know, so the question is, how do I know I'm on the right track? You know, how do I know if I'm growing or not? Well, we're going to face tests. We're going to face trials, and those are going to test us, and then we come out better on the other end. And so, you know, if that's how we know that we're growing. I think James 1 talks about that. And if we continue growing, we continue counting it joy when we fall into these temptations and tests, we're going to grow. Our faith is going to be tried and come out better on the other end.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody? All right. Brother Hall says, many religious people believe that strong convictions are not essential, that it is not important what one believes, just so long as he is honest and sincere. So we're stressing that you need to really have deep convictions, well grounded, know what you believe, know why you believe that. A lot of people say, "Oh man, that's so misguided. That's so off base," because it really doesn't even matter. And just as long as you are honest and sincere, you can basically believe anything you want. But just honesty and sincerity, those are the tests. How are you going to answer somebody who says that? Anybody? JD? One of the greatest examples of sincerity, I think, when Uzzah reached up to touch the ark, there's no doubt in my mind that he was absolutely sincere. I mean, that was a genuine, heartfelt concern for the safety of that precious religious item. And he struck dead. So Uzzah's a great example of sincerity. Doesn't prove anything. Carol?
Apostle Paul, before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, wasn't he honest and sincere?
No, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful example. Look at a couple places. I had actually noted that one too, Carol, because I think it is so good. In Acts 23, verse 1, Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." Chapter 24, verse 16. Paul says, "Herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men." So Paul said, I've always worked to have a good conscience. And that included when he was persecuting Christians. Go to chapter 26, verse 9. Acts 26:9, "I verily thought with myself that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth, which thing I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints did I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priest. And when they were put to death, I gave my voice against them, and I punished them off in every synagogue, and compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them even unto strange cities." So I think Paul is a classic example of, here's a person who's very sincere and totally committed to what he believed, and yet he was dead wrong. So we got, be ready to give an answer. We need to be ready with that answer, because we live in a religious climate where most people think that sincerity is all that matters. We need to be able to show that that's not so. So Wade?
I think Judas was sincere when he threw those 30 pieces of silver back onto the temple floor. I think he was pretty sincere, but then he went and hung himself and sinned again and died. I don't think Judas went to heaven, but I do think he was sincere. And I do think he believed all the things that Jesus did, because he was right there watching him all the time.
Okay, all right. I don't know. I might quibble with you on that one a little bit, but I'm willing to accept your explanation. The King James says he felt remorse. I think some versions say, maybe King James says he repented himself. That's what King James says, he repented himself. Other versions said he felt remorse. And so I'm not sure. We'll leave that one to God. God will be his final judge. But I don't feel too confident for Judas Iscariot. Bob?
I'm talking about being what it mattered about us having convictions and stuff. Last Sunday we talked about the Bereans. In Acts 17 and verse 11, it describes their attitude toward the Scriptures. These were more fair-minded than those of Thessalonica, that they received the word with all readiness and search the Scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. So, they were always ready in mind to search, to know.
And that's the way it should be.
Things that were presented, and then they had a conviction based
Yeah.
on that.
If somebody wants to study with you about instrumental music, I'm not afraid to talk with anybody about instrumental music. We should be ready. But if we have our convictions well grounded and we know the truth, then you're not afraid to go into such a study, because you know what you know and you know why you know it or believe it. And so you're prepared. And so we should be open and ready. Rita?
Yeah, I was just thinking on Matthew 7:22. I always think of that because it talks about
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of, as long as I'm sincere or, you know, it doesn't matter what I do, there is a way.
I think that's a good example. Those people, for all indication there, as Jesus described it, that they were genuine, they were sincere, but they were going to be lost. I think that's a good example. Karen?
For several people have mentioned about Paul before and what a total change he did, because the one verse that came to my mind was in 2 Timothy 1:12, where he says, "For this reason I also suffer these things, but I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed and am convinced that he's able to guard that what I have entrusted to him until that day." What a total change.
And notice he said, I know and I'm convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Let's go ahead.
All right, number 6. It says, what can we do to help young people prepare for college professors who might ridicule their faith? So we've been kind of talking about kind of a wide lens, you know, having your faith attacked, but this kind of narrows in on college age people. So what can we do to help young people prepare for college professors who might ridicule your faith? I'll give you a couple things I looked up. I looked up some statistics, which are pretty scary. I hadn't really looked at these before, but almost 70% of young adults who go to college stop attending church, and that's not just members of Churches of Christ. That's people that, you know, would call themselves a Christian. But almost 70% stop attending church when they go to college. Various reasons for it. In some fields of study, 50% of professors are agnostic or atheist. Engineering is pretty high. Over 50% of engineering professors are agnostic or atheist.
Crazy.
Yeah, so I've got a quote. I got 2 quotes I'll read to you really quick. This is from a professor. His name's Richard Rorty. He says, "We try to arrange things so that students who enter as bigoted, homophobic, religious fundamentalists will leave college with views like our own. We're going to go right on trying to discredit you, fundamentalist parents, in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamentalist religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem rather silly than discussable." Another quote from another professor says, "Every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is insane because he comes to the school with certain allegiances toward our founding fathers, toward his parents, toward a belief in a supernatural being. It is to you teachers to make all these sick children well by creating the international children of the future." So those are quotes from college professors alive today. So I think this question's a good one. How do you prepare young people for dealing with those professors who are going to ridicule your faith? I mean, they said, we're going to attack your faith. We're going to make your parents are crazy and silly for teaching you about this supernatural being. So has anybody got any thoughts about what we can do? Go ahead.
Josh, it's not only in the college, it's in the high school also.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
I have a nephew, in his senior year, he was taking a science test, and on one of the questions, how was the earth formed? He had quoted Genesis 1:1. He got an F for the whole test. So.
Yeah. They're actually saying it's the job of teachers to get those religious beliefs out, get them out.
Yeah.
So I put down, in answer to that question, Josh, one of the things we got to do is study evidences.
Yeah.
And we try to do that here on a fairly regular basis. Study the evidences for our faith. Why do you believe? And we can't stress that enough. I mean, it is so critical that we supply the information to our young people so that they are ready to face those challenges. I got to tell you, one of the things that I think you got to add to that list is keep them out of some of those atmospheres. You know, in those environments where, if you're going to such a place that is notorious for that kind of worldliness, don't let your kids go there.
Right.
You know, be more selective than that. But certainly study, get them grounded in evidences and doctrine. And then I added another thing there. I think for those of us who are older, we've got to consistently demonstrate our own faith. If I've got teenage kids in my house and they see me, not all the time, but it happens. It happens way more than it should. They see me compromise my convictions, So there's a big ball game, and I want to go to it. But if I go to it, I'm going to have to miss services on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, whatever. I'm going to go. I tell you, we've said it over and over again. Kids pick up on that quicker than anything else. So one of the things that we need to do if we're going to prepare them to face these challenges is consistently demonstrate our own faith.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, got to be grounded. So here's what happens when you go to college. I think, this professor comes in, is pretty charismatic. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but they're pretty charismatic. And they've got these letters behind their name, and you think, well, I mean, they got a PhD. I mean,
he's got to know what
obviously,
he's talking about.
Yeah, he's got to. It's like Googling something. It's got to be true because it's on the internet. It's got to be true because this smart college professor told me. And they'll do things like Gordon said and try to totally discredit. I dealt with the same thing in college. I remember a few instances. Right? But if you're not grounded at all, and you're so the study here is talking about if you're poorly equipped, well, then this person that acts like he knows everything and tells me that God isn't real is going to shake me all up, and I'm going to say I don't have a good answer for that. And so I think you're right if we're not grounded. So I think part of it's on the church here to make sure us presenting lessons, make sure we're putting forth lessons that talk about evidences, and part of it's on parents, and part of it's on the students as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Paul.
Paul.
Talk about college students, this is the time of conversation. Rachel, who is our daughter, is a sophomore at the University of Arkansas. And this week she was assigned a book she had to buy, and she's reading it now. And let me tell you what this book is called. All right? It's called The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love. And part of the description of the book says, the will to change gets to the heart of the matter about marital status, ethnicity, sexual orientation, toxic masculinity, and fundamental emotions. So we already know from that what this book is about.
Oh yeah.
But we asked her about it today, and she said that the professor knows her viewpoints and is going to allow her to write a counterpoint essay
Good.
to
Yeah.
the book.
Good.
So there are, there's ways that a Christian student can take these classes.
But you got to stand up. You got to speak up. You got to. Good.
But this is happening all the time.
Yeah.
And the other thing that she encounters a lot on campus is all the free events with free T-shirts and the free food and all of that. They're all sponsored by the more liberal organizations.
Yeah.
And they're drawing them in by the hundreds.
Yeah.
Because kids have got to eat.
It's
Right.
the thing to do. Yeah. JD.
I just want to ask you to continue importance of parental influence, on kids when you go to college. I had some friends that their parents kind of acted like they were practically grown up once they were going to college, and a lot of those people ran crazy and did things. The conversation my dad had with me is you may be 18 and the government may tell you I can't tell you what to do, but as long as I'm still paying into your bills or you got a place in my house, you'll live by the same rules and expectations that your company always had.
Good for your dad.
You're adults and you can go decide to do whatever you want, but know it comes with consequences.
Yeah, good for your dad. Good for you. We're just all but out of time with it. Let's go real quick. Another passage. What kind of preaching helps to build strong convictions? 2 Timothy 4. You know this text. 2 Timothy 4, beginning verse 2. Paul says to the preacher Timothy, preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. So Paul told him, preach the word instant in season and out of season. And I think we've rightly understood that to mean preach God's truth when it's well received and when it's not. Preach God's truth when it's popular and when it's not. Preach the truth. It doesn't matter what the religious atmosphere or environment is. Preach the truth. And then we've also pointed out from verse 2 that there's the positive side of preaching, the exhortation, but there's also the negative side, the reprove and the rebuke. I think we have to have a mix of positive and negatives. Yes, we should hear the positive truths of the gospel, the good news, the hope-building kind of messages. But we've got to reprove and rebuke sin too. again, that's a problem in our world, and I'm afraid it's even becoming an increasing problem among our brethren. They don't want that negative emphasis at all. They want everything to be positive. Well, that doesn't get the job done. And if we go that route, our people will not be well grounded, and they'll be ripe for having their convictions shaken up by the religious scoffers in the world. Thoughts, anybody? Real quickly, let's go on. 8, Josh.
Okay, number 8 says, state some reasons why many Christians have not grown sufficiently to defend by the scriptures the truth on various controversial questions. So why have Christians not grown? We talked about growing earlier, but I put down, if I can get there quickly, I put down 1 Peter 2 and verse 2. It says, as newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby. I think we got to have a desire to grow. I mean, before you can, it's not just going to happen. You got to have the desire to do that. And so you got a desire to get into the word and try to study and try to gain more understanding so that you know how to face these things that come.
So you got to have the desire, but you also got to put forth the effort.
Yeah, time and effort.
You know, I've said for years, man, I wish I knew how to play the guitar.
Yeah, me too.
I even got a guitar a few years ago, but I wouldn't sit down and work at it.
Right.
And, you know, the people who are good on the guitar spend hours a day on the guitar. So I had desire, but wouldn't put forth the effort. A lot of people are that way about Bible knowledge. Yeah. They want to be better Bible students, but they were not investing the effort.
I saw a video of a little boy trying to study, and he was like taking the book and like trying to, it's not going to work. You're going to have to put forth time and effort. But yeah, I think people have failed to put forth the energy. But also I thought about, I won't read it, but 1 Thessalonians 5:14 talks about supporting the weak. I think we've got to be concerned about people that are weak. I mean, so there's an onus on the individual, but there's an onus on us to, if we recognize it, then try to hold their hands up, try to look out for their well-being. Also think a lot of times people deal with sin, you know, in the parable of the sower. You know, you get into some rocky soil, and so maybe you kind of start out strong, and then you just wane and go by the wayside because sin kind of bogs you down. And so I think dealing with that sometimes is causing people to not have grown sufficiently.
I think so too. Anybody thought? The last question in this series is, what can one do to overcome this trial of having your people attack your convictions? How can we overcome this trial of our faith? There are going to be scoffers. There are going to be people who attack what we believe. There are going to be people who make fun of what we believe, ridicule us, even persecute us. Obviously, the answer to that is a stronger faith. Our own personal faith has to be stronger, and you get a stronger faith by more study, more exposure to God's truth. Faith, it's always been true. Romans 10:17, faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God. So more time in the Word, deeper study. I think also we learn from the example of other faithful brethren. They help make us stronger. Stronger faith is the answer, right? And that's what we got to have. John?
I think in law enforcement, Paul, when you go out in the field, you're armed, you go out and you can kind of get armed with a difficult situation. We're always told to have spiritual fitness in place, be spiritually fit, so that you know what you're driving at. We're in a spiritual warfare. We're going to go out there using our sword, which is fire, the way you war against somebody fighting against God. We need to have a spiritual fitness.
Thank you. Right, well said. Okay, thanks to Josh. Several of you have said that you enjoyed this tag team teaching effort. We'll try to get back. We'll try to do that again at some point in the future. I've enjoyed it, Josh.
Yeah, it's
thank
been
you.
good.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next week, heads up next week, we're going to go to, in this class, a survey of the Old Testament. You know, we've studied the Old Testament a lot of times, this book or this section and another section, but what we're going to do is, and it's going to be an overview, and so we'll move rapidly through sections of the Bible, but we're going to do a survey of the whole Old Testament. And so there are workbooks on the table in the back. Pick one of those up, and Lord willing, we'll dive into that study next week. Thanks, everybody.